Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lori Finkelstein. I am the director of JHU Museums, and I am so thrilled that you have chosen to spend part of your afternoon with us here virtually at Evergreen for today's Hopkins at Home discussion. We are live streaming from Evergreen Museum and Library today. We are, excuse me, we're located at 4545 North Charles. And if you have not had a chance to visit us in person, we are open to the public. And you can join us on our via our website to reserve a tour. But for today, you do not have to leave your homes. We are going to be coming to you to share with you some of the fascinating and beautiful objects that are on exhibit in our art glass exhibit. I will be in a moment turning things over to my colleague, Michelle Fitzgerald, and she is going to walk you through some of the more beautiful pieces that we have on exhibition here at Evergreen. Before I do that, I would also like to very much thank our colleagues from Hopkins at Home for allowing us to be a part of this wonderful project and giving us the opportunity to share the history and the beauty of Evergreen with all of you today. So as I mentioned a moment ago, I'm joined today by my colleague, Michelle Fitzgerald, who is Curator of Collections for JHU Museums. And I should mention that JHU Museums consists of two institutions, Evergreen Museum and Library, as well as Homewood Museum, which is located on the Homewood campus. Michelle has curated this exhibit that she will be showing you momentarily. And the exhibit actually began as a student project back in the spring semester of 2020. We had a student who joined us at Evergreen. She was doing her minor in the university's Museums and Society program, and she was majoring in communications. And she was very interested in working with objects and thinking of ways to use her communication skills to share the history and the aesthetics of those objects with a wider public. So we tasked her with creating a new permanent installation for the museum. And she worked for many months researching and writing drafts of text labels. And then the pandemic happened and we postponed the exhibit. And then Michelle joined our team and she picked up where the student had left off and completed curating this exhibit. She did additional research. She worked to arrange the objects that are on display and really sought to tell a story of art glass, not just in terms of the collection we have here at Evergreen, but a broader story about why people in Victorian America were so drawn to this decorative arts and why it was so appealing and of interest to them. So I believe Michelle's going to be sharing some of that with us here today. She's going to focus on some specific pieces on in the exhibition. And then we'll turn things over to all of you to ask questions to us. I will moderate the questions and we are happy to answer any questions that you have and share any comments that you may have for us. Before we begin, I will just mention quickly one more thing. This exhibit is a permanent installation at Evergreen, but it will not always be on exhibit. And you ask, how is that a permanent exhibit? Well, we will be taking this exhibition down in May for a photography show. And then that will be followed by another exhibition on the history of houseplants. And then this exhibition will come up and will stay installed for quite some time. And it features all items from our own collection. And that gives us tremendous freedom to be able to rotate them on and off and bring new objects on display into this space. So this will perhaps be your first viewing of this exhibit, but hopefully it will not be the last. And perhaps you can come and visit us in person and see it in its permanent form in real life. So Michelle, I'm thrilled to be able to turn things over to you, and I'm so eager to hear what you will be sharing with us here today. Thank you so much for being in the gallery space and joining us.
Thanks, Lori. And as you just mentioned, my name is Michelle Fitzgerald, and I'm the Curator of Collections for Johns Hopkins University Museum, which includes Evergreen Museum and Library, where we are virtually taking a tour today. And if any of you have not yet been to Evergreen Museum, I highly recommend coming to visit us because this is one of the coolest collections that I personally have ever had a pleasure to work on. Evergreen was constructed in the 1850s and had since become home to the Garrett family for 2 generations at the turn of the 20th century around that time. The Garretts had a lot of interest in the art world and decorative arts, and through them slowly began to amass an impressive collection that ranges from Japanese decorative arts, including Netsuke and Inro, and fine art from a lot of early 20th century artists, and also an incredible glass collection that comprises of over 400 pieces of art glass. Now that art glass was started by the Garretts, but it was continued over, I would say, the next 70 years under the stewardship of Johns Hopkins University through generous donations from some of our favorite attendees, I guess. As Lori mentioned, Art Glass at Evergreen, the exhibit we're going to tour today, was begun before the pandemic through the work of an amazing Johns Hopkins University undergraduate student, and then was really picked up through a curatorial team of me, Lori, and Natalie Shores, our registrar, who helped to arrange and pull some of the gems from our glass collection. So today, I'm just going to show you a small portion of the exhibit, which is just representing a small portion of our glass collection. They're all beautiful pieces, so it's really hard to decide. So I thought today I would show you just 3 of my personal favorite objects, and then you can come and take a look at this exhibit in person and maybe pick out a couple of your favorites as well. So for the first object, you will not be surprised to notice that it's right at the beginning of the exhibit right here. And this is produced by Tiffany Studios, and that's a name you're going to hear a lot today, no surprise. And it's the Tel El Armana vase, and this piece, that's what's referred to as the style. You'll notice this gold is probably the first you saw in this glass, but towards the base, we also have a really nice blue example fading up, and most notably, there is this sort of zigzag hand-painted design here. And just looking at this piece gives you a sense too of what art glass actually is. We're not talking about necessarily utilitarian pieces of glasswork here. This is stuff that was intended to be one of a kind, which you get from this sort of hand painting impact and through some of the glass techniques we'll talk about later. And it was especially popular among wealthy Americans and really prompted by Tiffany Studios. The reason we decided to start the exhibit with this piece is it really encompasses perhaps what you may not always think about with art glass when we think about his amazing lamps that are produced by the studios and these sort of amazing natural effects. But one of the other big influences is this nostalgia for an ancient past and interest in archaeology that's happening in the early 20th century. So when I'm referring to Armana, from the name of this vase, I am talking about an archaeological site in Egypt that was especially popular at the early 20th century. It started probably gaining interest around the 1880s when an Egyptian woman discovered 3 tablets that provided some of the biggest insight into Egyptian daily life that we have to this day. And that prompted extensive excavation work, especially through Western scientists coming over to Egypt, conducting this work. And it also prompted a high amount of tourism. So we know Louis Comfort Tiffany had an interest in Egypt, in the Middle East, in North Africa, and especially was interested in the Byzantine Empire. But we know that he visits Armana during the archaeological excavations, and so probably became familiar with a couple of things. This city in Egypt was known for a very distinctive art style, but they're also known for glassworks and a specific sort of blue shade. So if any of you are big glass fans, you might recognize the Tel El Armana vase style. It's typically blue. And so this one's kind of a unique example for that gold detail, but that sort of zigzag pattern up the top where he's mimicking a lot of ancient pottery coming out of archaeological excavations is really what signals it as part of that style. And that really, I think, speaks to not only that nostalgia that we mentioned earlier, that again fits into this need for everything to be one of a kind for luxury objects and handmade. But it also speaks to this sort of fascination with exoticism that you see growing, especially among newly wealthy families in America, who are looking for sort of distinguishing features of their homes that they can have sort of in place of using generational wealth to sort of claim their status in society. So that's one of my first favorite pieces, but I'm going to take you through the exhibit a little bit and we can look at some more. And when I talk about ancient Egypt, I think one of the big names that people associate with it is, of course, King Tut, or the King Tut vase we have over here is its name. And actually, kind of a fun fact, Tut was, his father was the ruler of Amarna when it was briefly the capital of Egypt. So brief tangent there. But this vase is actually not produced by Tiffany Studios. It's Durand Art Glass, which is a branch of Vinland Art Glass, or Vinland Glass, I'm sorry, in New Jersey. And Durand only operated between, I think, 1924 and 1931. So this is a very small window in time. And you can see with this vase, something that I think a lot of visitors find really interesting is, once again, it's got a sort of form and shape that looks very contemporary to our 2022 eyes, and doesn't necessarily, it's not what we would think of with art glass. But as you look closer, you'll see these beautiful sort of unique swirling patterns through it. And the gold in this really, the way it dimples almost makes it look like it's gold leaf. And this is in a similar vein of the Tel El Amarna vase that we were looking at earlier, in that it's pulling from a lot of ancient material coming out of archaeological excavations in the period. Not necessarily vases like this coming out of these period, but the actual form itself. This is called a Damascus pattern here, is one of its names. That's how they were referring to it. And it originates over 2,000 years ago in the Middle East in metalwork. They start using it in glass, in the art glass period especially. And what that means for Glassworks is that you have about 2 canes or more of colored glass that you are swirling throughout this and weaving through to create that sort of unique, interesting pattern. It's kind of ironic that I'm talking to you so much about these one-of-a-kind styles and designs, and everything needs to be of its own, because Durand, I told you it was 1924, so it's later than Tiffany. But Durand Art Glass gets a lot of its glass designers, a lot of its glass manufacturers who are working there from other glassworks that were in turn inspired directly from Tiffany. So the Tiffany workers are going to those glass factories and then they're moving to Durand. And so a lot of these later factories, or Durand in particular, I should say, is even using patterns that were produced by Tiffany initially. And so you see this sort of fluid movement of these individual glass designers working under a company name, who are moving between these companies and manufacturers and bringing those style ideas and those manufacturing techniques with them. And so this piece is kind of tucked away here in this window with all these other amazingly beautiful pieces. But I encourage you to take a moment to really look at some of these other manufacturers we have in our collection and see how you can pull out some of the similarities among all of these unique pieces. But I feel like I would be negligent in this exhibit if I didn't show you one of our probably most famous pieces of Tiffany that we have in this exhibit and in the Evergreen collection. And that is over here, if you'll follow me. And it's our Spiderweb lamp, which was purchased by the Garretts. And this is just quintessential Tiffany here. You can see, starting at the base, these very, very cute mushroom gills. It's an upturned mushroom for any foragers or hikers out there. And it kind of moves into this natural looking stem that actually looks more to me in a classical style, so a little more man-made. And it finishes off up here in the metalwork with a spider, in case you were wondering why it's called the Spiderweb lamp. It's kind of a like steampunk robot spider, but nonetheless, that's what we have here. And it's speaking to these sort of natural themes. which makes sense because this unique glass pattern we have moving out that we so strongly associate with Tiffany is called Fabrial Art Glass. And Fabrial, some sources theorize, comes from the Old English word fabrial, which means handcrafted. So it's this it goes back to that nostalgic theme again for this Old English technique and for this need for things to be handmade, which is very strongly a reaction to the Industrial Revolution that you see happening in the early 20th century. So if you're familiar with William Morris and any of those big names, they're all sort of gelling in different concepts of this need for things to be handmade and beautiful in that sense. There are a lot of natural components to this as well, and natural themes, and that's something that Tiffany is especially known for. And that's him really playing into the Art Nouveau movement, which really emphasizes beauty in nature in all forms and unique and organic looking objects. Tiffany definitely operated under this policy, and that influenced his studios, and then in turn, many other art glass studios from that beauty can be found only really the study of beauty through nature and the fact that not everything is going to be patterned and perfect. And so his glass that he starts producing, the Fabrial, is very interesting because what makes it particularly unique is that this color that you're seeing is actually infused into the glass itself, which was a technique Tiffany Studios developed. And no two pieces can really be the same due to that manufacturing style. So the other thing, I just have to change a beat for a moment to tell you something I find personally most interesting about this lamp, even beyond Tiffany, is it really, really strongly speaks to the collecting history of Tiffany glass in particular, but art glass in general, I would say. When this lamp was purchased by the Garretts in the early 20th century, we know they purchased it for $75. In the 1950s, after Tiffany Studios went bankrupt in 1932, by the time we get to the 1950s, this same lamp is valued at a fifth of its cost that it was purchased for. And then today, as I said earlier, it's one of our most popular pieces of art glass in our collection. So what you really see just from that price difference alone is this rise and fall of interest in art glass, and then a renewed interest that happens around the 1960s when there's a very brief, I think the term is the Art Nouveau revival, and this new interest in handcrafted products that happened from then. And then art glass really holds its place in our hearts from then beyond. But there was a really significant period of time where people were not interested in purchasing this art glass. So it's something that I definitely encourage anyone who visits this gallery to really think about, is how these sort of specific interests in nostalgia and handmade in Glassworks as beauty and uniqueness, how those interests might rise and fall, and what that says, not just about this period, but as society as a whole throughout history. So there's a lot to be learned about the collecting history too. But I have now gone on about some of my favorites, and that doesn't seem fair. I think I should share and hear more from you guys. So I'm gonna take a seat, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about art glass at Evergreen.
All right, Michelle, I'm going to share some questions with you.
Sounds good.
A few are coming in right now. This is a terrific question, and I know it's something that you and I have talked a little bit about, not in terms of glass, but in terms of silver plate. In fact, we were just chatting about that in my office the other day. So the question from one of our viewers is, was Depression era Glassworks a way to make glass pieces available to the general public?
Oh, Depression era glasswork is something I have to say is kind of interesting. I was digging into it recently, and now I can't even remember what question I was digging into with it. But it didn't actually have to do with this exhibit. But in some ways, I think you could argue it is something that is made accessible to the general public. And it's the same way that you see that with silver plate too, like we were talking about, where it's sort of a means of manufacturing that doesn't necessarily make it accessible to everybody. which is really important to think of, is art glass in particular is really only catered towards a very wealthy elite economic bracket. And so with this Glassworks, with Depression era glass, you're seeing, you're going a little bit into maybe a middle class economic bracket, but it's still fairly inaccessible to certain families. And I think that's important to remember, but it's highly collectible today, just like art glass.
I love that question because I think it goes to a lot of the conversations we have about trying to understand the pieces in our collection, not just from an aesthetic point of view or a manufacturing point of view, but also from how they translate into signifiers of class and status and who does not have access to them. However, I do also have a question about manufacturing techniques. So we're going to segue to that right now. And the question is, what were a few of the techniques used for infusing the glass with colors?
Oh, that is a highly technical question. And I will do my best to answer it, but I would definitely encourage going to the source of Corning Art Glass up in New York. They have a lot of wonderful digital resources and videos that will give you, I think, a better visual imagery of how this would happen. But I can talk a little bit about Damascus glass. I'm not sure I could really do favrile glass justice, but that Damascus, that caning technique. So you have these individual glass canes that are formed, and then as you melt them down, that's how they become pliable and movable. I'm not sure how the color actually gets infused itself. It's something I've wondered and haven't really been able to sort of pin down in my head to put into words correctly. So I really recommend going to Corning and taking a look at their resources.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, we have a question here. How do we determine the value or rarity of a piece in our collection, art glass or otherwise? And also, how do we decide what to add to the collection?
Ooh, that's fun. At first, I was thinking that they might be talking about their personal collections, and now I'm getting the museum content. So I'm actually going to answer both of those. And for museums, determining the value is a very sort of tricky thing. The outright way we do it, the financial value, is that we need an appraiser when an object comes into the collection to give us, and we ask that appraiser to sort of update as years go on and the market changes. But that appraiser would give us that value. And the reason that value would be important to us would be insurance purposes. So that's not the most fun answer, but I would say that the big assessment of value we do for objects is less on the financial end and much more so on the interpretive value of an object. So what can the Spiderweb lamp, for instance, tell us about not just the Garrett family and not just Evergreen, but Baltimore, about collecting history? What does it have to contribute to our collection? And that's really the value we put on the objects. And that really goes into also deciding what objects we want to add to our collection. We have quite an extensive collection, but we do still take objects, and that is the same sort of valuation method that we use. But on top of that, we also want to make sure that we can take care of it. So we're going to look at its condition, its needs as an object. Glass is a little more stable actually than some of the other objects in our collection. For instance, we have costumes. They're very famously tricky to have in museum collections. They like very specific temperatures, very specific storage. So we also want that sort of practical element that we can take it, we can use it, it'll educate the public in some way, it'll provide empathy, engagement in some way, and that we can take care of it and give it a nice long life. For your personal collection, I would also recommend an appraiser if you're really looking at getting that specific sort of valuation for tax, insurance, any sort of purposes like that. But if you're also just interested in your object, I would recommend going to Google and going to auction sites like firstdibs.com. There's sites that we use as well in the museum field, but it gives you, if you can find similar objects and look at what they sold for, it gives you sort of a vague idea of where your object might fit into that scheme. I would also recommend going just to general resources and learning about your object. So if you like art glass, look at some art glass collection websites, things like that, and you'll learn a lot about its value interpretively as well.
Thank you, Michelle. We have a question that's it's kind of a softball question, but I think it's a good, I think it's a good one to answer because it goes to I think how we exhibit pieces in a setting like this under glass versus, you know, under like a vitrine versus how these objects appear in the house. And so the question is, do the lamps work?
The lamps do work, but in terms of their exhibition, many of our lamps work, I should say, and we watch them very closely. We make sure they stay good and healthy, and that everything's good with them turning on and they can be used. But the shades themselves aren't going to be super heavily impacted by the lights coming on. In terms of their display, though, and really. That question kind of leads, I think, Lori and I both into this, how this exhibit came about. And that's placing them under vitrines and glass like this gives us the opportunity to allow our visitors to spend time with these objects. So in the house, they're in situ. They give you the opportunity to put all of these objects together and see how people lived, how people use these objects, how they were displayed, which is awesome. But doesn't necessarily give you enough time to look at the object one-on-one and get sort of an object study specific sense of that particular part of our collection. So our intent with this gallery space and with this art glass exhibit is to give you, the visitor, the opportunity to get that one-on-one time that you may not get in the house.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, we have a question here about contemporary art at Evergreen. And the question is, does Evergreen collect modern art glass from artists like Chihuly and Preston Singletary? And the answer is, we do not currently collect any contemporary art glass, but Michelle, we do have a contemporary art exhibit on display right now. Would you mind maybe using this question as a segue to talk a little bit how we do periodically work with contemporary artists elsewhere at the museum?
Yeah, sure. And I'll just go as well to why we don't collect that is Evergreen's interpretive period stops at 1952. So it gives us the opportunity right now to sort of concentrate on the Garretts and viewing Baltimore as a whole and other contexts through their sort of story and lens. But Alice Warder Garrett, one of the last residents here at Evergreen, was a huge patron of arts and loved new artists and performing arts. And so we do have collaborations with modern artists from time to time, different exhibits, performances, programs. I encourage you to keep an eye out on our calendar. And coincidentally, just this past Saturday, we opened one such exhibit. It's in our Basque Theater. So we do have a theater space here at Evergreen designed by Leon Basque, who you might know as he was the costume designer for he was the designer for the Ballet Russe in the early 20th century. And we have an artist named Bryce Brown who has done an installation, a site-specific installation that you can see here at Evergreen. That is a contemporary interpretation using dancers, some sculpture, of that space. So we do engage and have collaborative partnerships with them.
Thanks, Michelle. Michelle, do you know what the oldest piece in the collection is? I don't have that answer myself.
I think it's our camel. I'm not 100% on this, but I know the camel is at least one of our oldest pieces. And I'm kind of laughing at it because the camel is on display in the Garrett Library, which you can see on tour. And it is famously kind of a tricky object to move, but you can see it there. It dates to BCE. I'm not sure. I don't want to commit to saying what specific century right now, but I can definitely get that information if anyone's curious about it and pass it on. But I would say it's one of our oldest pieces. We have a huge range of objects that the Garretts were interested in collecting. I can tell you our Japanese lacquerware, for instance, one of our earliest pieces is the 14th century Japan, purchased by John Mark Garrett. So we range, and you'll see a lot of these objects on exhibit.
Thank you. We have a question here about other artists who are represented in the art glass collection. And the question is, are there any pieces from Tiffany's friend and fellow glass artist Lafarge?
Yes, is the short answer. I would have to, we have Lafarge in our collection. Our Glassworks collection is international. It's not just limited to the United States as well. So we also have Lot's Glasswork in Europe, which is based in Europe. And I'm trying to think as I'm talking right now about whether we have Lafarge currently on exhibit. I don't think it's in this particular exhibit, which means that I think you should visit it now and then come back when we reinstall this exhibit, since this permanent collection and this permanent exhibition is going to change, and you might spot it.
I'm going to give a couple more minutes to see if anyone wants to plop in another question in the chat. And if not, I think we're going to wrap this up. But please, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them. I'll give us one more minute. All right.
Lori, I have a question.
Okay.
What's your favorite piece of art glass on display right now?
It's the spider lamp, of course.
Of course.
I think I love that it was a one-off, right? That it was a factory mistake. I love that it has a spider, because spiders are just really cool and, you know, unfairly maligned in our culture. But I also have to say that I'm fascinated, and I didn't know this before we worked on this exhibit, on the fluctuating market value of all of these objects, and how tastes change. And, you know, I think that goes for all of Evergreen, right? Like high Victoriana is not everyone's jam. And some people come in and really respond very positively to what's in our collection, like from a personal taste perspective. And some people are just like, this is really cool, but I couldn't live with all of this. And I think people might have felt that way about art glass, that it was something maybe that their grandparents might have had, and then you don't see it as often, and you come back and appreciate it for the craftsmanship that goes into it. Michelle, did you speak at all about Margaret Wilson?
No, I'm happy to.
Yeah, so I think because we had one of the questions that came in that I didn't ask was, how many pieces did the Garretts collect? And I didn't ask it because I wanted an opportunity for us to explain that one of the interesting parts of this collection is that it's not all from the Garrett family. And it goes to the fact that we are at Evergreen, on the one hand, very much a historic house museum that represents two generations of a family who lived in this house between 1881 and 1952. But on the other hand, we're also very much a university museum, and we spoke about the student who did research on this exhibit. And a lot of this collection actually came to us through the Johns Hopkins community. So Michelle, could you speak a little bit about Professor Wilson?
Yes, absolutely. I think she's a really fantastic sort of example of some of our, how some of these objects came into our collection, and some gifts from interested collectors. Margaret B. Wilson was, as Lori mentioned, a professor. She actually really specialized in medicine, and joined.
She was a professor. I'm sorry to interrupt. She was a professor at Hunter. She wasn't a Hopkins professor, which is noting.
Yeah, and she was heavily involved in a lot of different organizations pertaining to that sort of academic field. But she was also interested in collecting decorative arts. And so I say decorative arts and keep it vague because she had an extensive art glass collection, but she also donated a considerable amount of other objects that we got via Johns Hopkins University. My understanding, the story sort of, as I understand it, of how this donation came to us was that she was looking for a university that was actively collecting decorative arts in the hopes of a decorative arts museum and opportunities for study for students. And that's how she sort of came to us at Hopkins for the museums. Lori, you might have heard a different sort of route for this, but that's the story I've been hearing from it. As you can probably tell, also, I should mention from the way I'm speaking about her, that this happened about 50 years ago. So this was not a necessarily recent donation.
Yeah. So we've pieced together our understanding of Margaret Wilson's relationship with the university through her obituary and through correspondence between the university in the 1940s and 50s and her, and also her, the trustee of her estate, who I believe was also her life partner. And she, I think, might have been interested in donating her collection to Hunter, and through various reasons that we can't quite piece together, they did not take her collection. And her partner had a relationship with Hopkins, and the objects came here. And we are very fortunate to have them. The bulk of the art glass collection at Evergreen actually is from Margaret Wilson. I would say the bulk of the loose pieces, and there's probably a better curatorial term for that, but a lot of the other art glass that's in the house belongs to the garret because it's in the form of stained glass windows that are part of the structure of the house, or are improvements to the house, in the form of many of the light fixtures and chandeliers that are in the house. So a lot of the art glass that we have that's attached to the home or is an improvement to the home comes from the Garrett family, and a lot of the individual pieces, many of which you see on display here, are from Margaret B. Wilson. We also have had recent, very generous donors who have continued to add Tiffany to our collection. We have a beautiful Tiffany desk set, a few pieces of which are on display from a generous donor named Wallace Lumpkin, and a few pieces from other pieces from him are on exhibit as well, in addition to the desk set, and also pieces throughout the house. So we do work with collectors who know that this is one of our focus areas, and from time to time they will make kind and generous gifts to us, for which we're very grateful. So we've got one more question, and then I think we're going to wrap this up. And the question, Michelle, is how do we clean and maintain the pieces? Carefully, very carefully.
Yes, we spend a lot of time talking about this and coming up with new strategies. Specifically for glass, we are very careful with their storage, for one thing, not just in the sense like, oh, if I drop it, it's going to break, but also objects are very happy at a certain temperature. It's a little bit colder than we as humans like to enjoy. But in general, most objects really are looking for a specific temperature and a specific humidity level. So we spend a lot of time really focusing on the environmental needs of objects. They also don't want too much light. So we spend a lot of time monitoring light. You might actually notice, if you come to Evergreen a lot, that sometimes objects disappear from display and other objects come out. And that's because we're trying to monitor all the light exposures that any of these objects would get. And then on the day-to-day, dusting is something we spend a lot of time making sure we do appropriately, especially at the glass collection. We're not using feather dusters or anything like that. We have special microfiber cloths that we use, and it also involves a lot of careful wiping down. Slightly finickier objects, like those big, elaborate Victorian frames that you might think of, aren't even going to use that cloth. We're going to have like a brush for those. So it's not dissimilar to how you might take care of your own collection at home. We just use slightly different tools to get that job done.
Great, thank you, Michelle. That wraps up all the questions that we have from you in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we sign off, I would like to just mention our hours and our location one more time. We are at 4545 North Charles Street, in Baltimore City, right between Notre Dame and Loyola colleges, though we are part of Johns Hopkins, and that's why we're with all of you today. And our hours are 11 to 4, Tuesday through Sunday. Tours can be reserved in advance online via Eventbrite. And if you go onto the museum's website, there is a link for how to do that. If you are unable to have a tour of the House of Evergreen, please know that between 11 and 4, Tuesday through Sunday, the museum gift shop is open and this art glass exhibit is open. The exhibit is free to the public and you do not need to take a tour of the museum to see the art glass exhibit. So if you wanted a tour and couldn't take one, you can still come visit us and see art glass at Evergreen. And maybe you didn't want a tour of the museum. Maybe you just want to see art glass at Evergreen. And that's perfectly fine as well. We welcome you any way you'd like to experience us. Please do consider coming to visit us. And of course, please reach out to us with any questions or concerns or other thoughts you might have. We're always happy to answer questions down the road. Michelle, thank you so much for spending time with us today, sharing your knowledge and expertise of this exhibit. We're very grateful. Thank you so much.